As a real-world artist, one of the things that's really great about designing in VR is that there's no physics, there's no structural engineering, and you can create large-scale installations and not have to worry about cost.
All right, we're back live at the HTC Vive. I love how that rhymes. We are live at the Vive Theater from HTC at IAAPA 23 Orlando. And I'm here with Philip Noyed. Did I get that right, Noyed?
You did.
Noyed, who's created this amazing VR art installation. And I'm not sure how to describe it. I think it's one of those things in VR, you kind of have to experience something to describe it. But I'm going to let you give it a try. So.
Okay, well, essentially, there's a lot of experiences like Meow Wolf or Unreal Garden where you go into an experience where it's an immersive art experience. And so what I've created is a VR version of that kind of experience, only it's far better because it's bigger, the lights are alive, and you actually feel like you're in the middle of outer space. So essentially, Neo Art Space would be 100,000 square feet, and it has 30 different light experiences. And all of it is awe-inspiring, and you really get a sense that you are in a different galaxy than where Earth is.
Now, that 100,000 square foot space, how much rent do you pay on that?
Well, you know, as a real-world artist, one of the things that's really great about designing in VR is that there's no physics, there's no structural engineering, and you can create large-scale installations and not have to worry about cost.
So let's talk about that as an artist. So before you got into VR, talk a little bit about like your journey as an artist and then what led you to doing this VR installation.
Well, I started as a potter and then an oil painter, and I've always worked on film production. I worked on Purple Rain, for instance, way back in the day.
Best music movie ever.
Yes, best music for sure. And then I create these oil paintings that are 3D, and if you use chroma depth glasses, they actually look 3D. And a local VR arcade said, do you want to be an artist in residence? And I'm like, damn, yes. So I created that painting as a way that you could actually go inside the painting. And it became like a 15-foot long by 15-foot high installation.
What application did you do that in?
I used Tilt Brush at the time. And then I just was also really enamored with the Meow Wolf business model and location-based art, because artists have a hard time selling one-offs, but when you have people coming to pay admission and going through an experience, it really is a great business model. But the pandemic hit, and so I laid out like a 60-page design of what I wanted to create in the real world. And I'm like, well, I'm just going to create it in VR. And I could create it even better because I wasn't limited by, you know, like you can only do things that are 15 feet high. I can actually create something that's 15 stories high. So that was kind of the evolution to how I actually created it.
And so what's the, you know, as an artist, I'm assuming your goal is to give somebody, you want to make them feel something, right? You want to give them an experience. So talk a little bit about that and how you're able to use VR as a tool to deliver on it.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Dr. David Hawkins, who has a book called Mapping the Human Consciousness. And he basically gives frequency levels. So anger and fear are the lowest levels, and joy and love and enlightenment are the highest levels. And so, you know, a lot of first-person shooters are like fear and anger and, you know, fight or flight. So I wanted to create an awe-inspiring, wonderful experience that is both, you know, inspiring, but also peaceful. And I've really accomplished that. I've shown it to like people who are pediatric doctors and to psychiatrists. And you know, one of the things that we've been finding with VR is in health places like a hospital or hospice, you know, that there's the ability to have VR, and it reduces anxiety, it reduces the need for pain medication. So I wanted to create an experience that somebody could be anywhere and want to feel like they're in something that's completely amazing while having these elevated feelings.
Yeah, interesting. And so what's the journey been with this thing? So I know you've been on the circuit, you've been going to conferences and exhibits, showing it to people to get it out there in the world. What's been, where's it been? What's the reaction been? Where's it going next? And then we'll talk about how it might wind up manifesting in this industry.
Right. Well, it was completed in July, and I have 2 developers working in Unity to make it all happen. And it's been in the Vivers Festival in Toronto, which is a VR festival. There's the Social Machinery Festival in Italy. Is in the Byron Bay one in Australia. I was at the Global Immersive Fest and I showed it there. But one of the things is that the film festival circuit is like a 10-minute VR experience where they want throughput. And this is a wide-ranging experience, and it's not a narrative. This is story living as opposed to storytelling. And so I think that licensing and perhaps showing it in a museum environment would be my next step.
Yeah, and so it's interesting you talked about that. It's a 100,000 square foot experience. If I were to go wander through a 100,000 square foot art gallery, it's going to take me, how long it's going to take me? Well, what's the experience length for somebody? And I know it's going to be very personal. It depends on how long you linger in any one thing, but what's the design goal of the experience length?
Well, everybody has their own way of navigating in VR, and I think like 90% of the people I show have never used VR before, and so like the controllers are a little bit wonky, and so just being propelled forward is like their easiest way to get around, and that's kind of slow. But there are like multiple ways of navigating within Neo Art Space. There are portals that you can jump through, and it's kind of like the beam me up, Scotty, and so you're like all of a sudden at the top of the space, the bottom of the space. There's also like a controller so you can blast around, and so people who are savants at VR, they can get through it in like 10 minutes and just feel like they've seen everything. But I've had like an 85-year-old person who just went into one place and just sat there and said, this is so immense, and just sat there for like 10 minutes and thought it was amazing. So everybody brings, that's one of the things I've been really found out is that everybody brings their own stuff. I had a childhood psychiatrist who went through and she just was like clicking like down the path, and I'm like, look up, look around, and she was just so trying to get down the path that it wasn't, she was following the rules. I'm like, wow, that's a really interesting thing. I would think that as a childhood psychiatrist would be like, whoa, but yeah, so everybody brings their own stuff. And so it can be like a 10-minute, most of the time here it's been about a 10-minute experience.
Yeah. And so when you're watching people, you've been showing it to people, how have people's reactions kind of impacted your design over time? Like, what was that like as you were developing it?
Well, I've been a career-long creative director, and I've always done a lot of usability studies. And so I wanted this to be highly usable and accessible. So I didn't have strobe lights because I didn't want people to like kind of get nervous, and I really watched people walk around. So for instance, I had a CFO go into a wall and get stuck in all blackness, and I couldn't get him out. And so I have colliders so that people are on a path and they can't just, an entrepreneur, before I had the colliders, which are like a invisible barrier, an entrepreneur like went out into outer space and he wouldn't come back. I'm like, I can't have people get lost in space. So there are various navigational constructs, like a path that you can see, and then also like billboards that are by the portals that people can look at. But the one thing that's always been fascinating as a creative director is that nobody reads. And you almost need to have somebody there explaining things because people would want to just dive in, and so that's kind of frustrating.
They certainly don't read in VR, and they certainly don't listen to cues. You have to actually like guide them through what you want them to do.
Yeah. The other thing with Neo Art Space is that there's 3 different experiences. One is a single player, one is a public multiplayer, and I can have up to 100 people go into it, and And I have 9 different avatars that are all light beings that you become, eyes blink, mouth moves. And then there's also private multiplayer. So say this was at a arcade, and you had a family of 4, only the family of 4 would go in there at a time. So that way it's private and also communal. The other thing that's fun is like I always show it at different places where multiple people can go in. And what's fascinating is I thought that they would move as a tribe, but what actually happens is like a husband and wife just like split apart. And I'm like, don't you want to find your husband? And she's like, no. But I do have a finder capability, so if you lose a friend, you can find a friend.
Yeah, sometimes I get on an airplane and I see a couple that are split apart, and I'll offer to switch seats so they can sit together, and more times than not, they're like, no, that's okay.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm going to enjoy this 2.5 hours of quiet. I'm curious about the multiplayer. Like, how social does that wind up being for people? Like, do they actually talk to each other,
yes,
what's that experience like to
it's
observe
all
it?
geo-specific sound, so you and I would be able to hear each other, but that person over there wouldn't be able to. And actually, part of my design process was, I came up with like images, and then I showed like what the image of like say a globe that shoots out a UFO would be, and I shared it in a PowerPoint with my developers. But then we'd actually go in as a group and do all the eyesight lines and do the modifications in the actual experience. And it was really fun because we are able to talk. We have little trailers behind so that people, like, you might not see the person, but you can see the trailer, and then you can follow the trailer too. So.
Cool. Now you've done some big art installations in airports and things like that. And what's the so where does this wind up going? Like, one of the frustrations that I have is I see all of these really great artistic expressions done in virtual reality from you and people like Felix and Paul, and they do these great things, but people never get to experience them because there's no distribution for a lot of this more artistic. Like, if you make a zombie game, you can go to an FEC and somebody's going to pay you a ticket to go see to play a zombie game, but these artistic spaces are just not, there's Meow Wolf, and but they're only in 3 cities, and there's only so much physical construction. How do you imagine these experiences wind up getting to people? How are they going to see them?
There are a few different virtual reality museums.
The Museum of Other Realities.
Yeah,
was one of them.
Well, there's one in Madrid, there's one in Montreal, and there are more of them where they are giving, like a real world artist, the opportunity. And it's my hope that contemporary art museums will start incorporating VR and also AR, because AR is like equally as exciting as VR in terms of making images come to life and having people be able to interact with them. But what's interesting is how old-fashioned museums are. It's like things on the wall, things that are sculptures, and that's why I like some of these newer venues where there's projections and interactions with projections and then VR. So I'm hoping that at some point museums will jump on board and say, you know what, this is something I need to support. My first time I did VR was actually at MoMA, and there was this African artist who created like these little cities that were all made out of cardboard, and they were quite beautiful. And there were like table after table of them, and you look down and they'd be like 6 inches, 8 inches tall. But they actually set up a VR viewing area with like 8 seats, and all of a sudden you're in the city and you could see up and you can see around, and it made it come to life in a whole new way. And so I hope that museums start to latch on to it. The Louvre actually has a Leonardo da Vinci exhibit where you can go into his studio and then see how the Mona Lisa was made. And so a lot of the museums are using VR as ancillary to an exhibit, but I hope that they start discovering artists like me to create experiences that are all art, not just as the exhibit.
Yeah, and I do think the projection map stuff, which kind of blew up on a touring, is getting people's attention, and so it's got to be capturing the attention of the old school art museums to realize that this is something that's possible. How do do you have any idea what the process is? There are a couple of companies, one Positron I think I've mentioned.
Yes.
There's actually a company here called Immersion, which I'm going to take you out and introduce you to, that does, they do VR experiences in zoos and aquariums, which was which was a challenge because they're underfunded a lot of times. Like zoos don't have a lot of money, aquariums don't have a lot of money. A lot of their money goes into research and into conservation, and so doing new high-tech attractions is challenging, and I would imagine for, for museums it's the same way. And so maybe we'll find some distribution channels where people can take the content and then get it in a turnkey solution that can actually get out into the world.
In my research, a lot of the museums have a film department or a photography department, and they are just starting to have digital art departments. And I think that now that there are colleges teaching VR and AR, that museums will end up catching up with that. But I think that there are so many opportunities within the museum world to, like, say the Dali Museum, you could actually go into one of his landscapes and experience it in a whole different way that you wouldn't in a 2D experience, and would bring it to life in a whole different way. So I'm hoping that curators start saying VR is viable and actually makes a better experience.
Yeah, and the whole, again, the experience for the attendee at the museum is this concept of transformation, right? I mean, art is about transformation, and I think that when you can make somebody feel this sense of awe and it raises their vibration, not to be too like woo-woo and Jimmy Cliff on you, but it's important.
Well, it's true. Like say you go to a museum and you go to the Egypt area and you see a mummy, and then you see like maybe a block that has hieroglyphs, or you could actually go into the pyramid and walk through it for 10 minutes and you see it all in place.
And I did that. I went to the Paris Architecture Museum and they had a walkthrough of the pyramids in virtual reality and free roam, and it was still one of the most memorable experiences I've ever had. It was amazing. And there was, go ahead, I'm going to think of the other thing I was going to say.
So it's my hope that, as an immersive artist, that there will be opportunities to help museums bring things to life in this way. It doesn't have to just be me painting, but there's so many different ways to be able to do 3D modeling that it's a better experience and really brings these artifacts to life.
Yeah, awesome. So what's next? So you've developed this massive art installation in virtual reality, in Unity. What's the next creative inspiration that you have?
Two. Well, actually, I'm always having multiples, but I think that AR, in using that with my paintings, but also I'm creating something called the Healing Chakra Mandala. I really like Tibetan mandalas, but again, it's 2D and you look down at it. So you can actually go into this mandala, and because it's healing chakras, you go through each one of the colors. And so each one of the colors has a frequency, and it also has music. I'm working with a musician that the music has the same frequency of, say, yellow or red. And so the idea is that you can meditate in each one of these places and be able to kind of see your breath. And again, it's a healing experience. Probably not mass market, but it's a way that you can really give people a way to engage with mandalas and the chakras in a whole different way.
And one of the more popular consumer apps in VR is Trip, which is a meditation app, and I don't know how many hundreds of thousands or millions of copies they've sold. But it's constantly in the top 10 of the Quest store, and so I do think that there is a mass market in the consumer side for applications like that.
And I love Trip, in as much as like I've been a lifelong meditator, but it's easy to have monkey mind. We have 70,000 thoughts a day, so it's easy to just like not know what like. Concentrating your breath is hard, but when you're in Trip, you have this music and you can see your breath coming in and out, and it allows you to concentrate in the experience in a way that I have a hard time doing in reality. So it's an example of how virtual reality makes that experience far better.
And again, it's another way of meditation, is another way of getting transformation. So there's art, there's meditation, there's lots of ways of transforming consciousness, and there's plenty of room for zombie shooters, but it's good to see somebody taking a kind of a higher vibration approach to using this tool as a way to kind of better humanity, and I applaud you for that.
VR for good.
VR for good, awesome. Philip Noyed, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, I appreciate it.
My pleasure.